Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gaming with me, Tony Mo, and we're here today to continue my E3 coverage with the last piece of coverage we're going to do for the EA press conference, and that is for Battlefield 1, of course. How could I leave Battlefield 1 behind? I think there are a ridiculous amount of people excited for Battlefield 1 for a lot of good reasons, and I think, the biggest reason of them all, whether you're an old Battlefield player, a new Battlefield player, someone who's just looking at this game now, of course, is that World War I setting. So a lot of us just wanted to see this thing in action, especially in multiplayer, and that's what we finally got at the end of the EA press conference with an hour-long live stream they did, actually playing the game. 64 players, they had celebrities, YouTubers, the like, battle it out in traditional Conquest, although with some of the Battlefield 1 twists, which included an airship, a Zeppelin. Yeah, a lot of good stuff to talk about, so we're going to break it all down. This is probably going to be a relatively lengthy video. I strongly recommend throwing it into the background, grabbing a bite to eat, or working on something else while you listen to this one, because there's so much to talk about and so much that I have to say. Obviously some concerns thrown into the mix, but really just a lot of awesome stuff, and it was nice to actually see people play the game. You know, to just see people play it, to see some of the flaws in the game, to realize, okay, this is actual gameplay. Like, that guy just failed to climb up a pile of rubble 6 times in a row. Yeah, that's Battlefield. But a lot of awesome stuff mixed into it. And I think the first thing I want to go into and get out of the way is how incredibly beautiful the game looked. They were playing on PC, while some people were playing with a controller, some people, including Terry Crews, who, even more respect for that jacked, crazy dude, because he doesn't really play games, and he went mouse and keyboard. It was like, yeah, I'm gonna mouse and keyboard. You could tell he was struggling, but I loved that he did that. It was like the only interesting celebrity interaction that I saw the entire time, so that was really cool. But the game looks stunning. Frostbite technology, absolutely incredibly beautiful. Like, so many insane lighting and particle effects just really helped bring the game to life visually, I think, more so than any Battlefield game ever. Like, to me, what I saw just on a stream, YouTube compression be damned and everything, was one of the best looking Battlefield games I had ever seen. Probably running on some pretty gnarly rigs, but I also would have to say that I feel, for the most part, Battlefield games have been pretty well optimized in terms of visual performance. Battlefield 4 ran amazingly for me, even on my 3GB AMD card. So, of course, that differs from game to game. But the game looks beautiful, and I hope that my PC can run it on those exact settings when the game releases later this year, because I want to play it looking like that, because, damn, is that a pretty looking game. And there's a lot of things, like I said, effects-wise, particle effects, weather effects, which we'll talk about in a second, that really enhanced the overall atmosphere of it all. But I would say that the game looked, I hate to say it looked grittier, but it did. Like, they captured sort of the mud, the dirty environments, the cobblestone type buildings. I just feel like they're nailing the environmental design of that era really well, and that was just one map that we saw. So hopefully it's the same way across the board with all of the other multiplayer content, but I was constantly impressed by that. And it got even better when we're like in buildings dealing, like I said, with smoke and, all the effects from vehicles, when they had a few small glimpses of people inside of tanks or inside of a biplane or a triplane, and you're seeing the propeller like spinning away at the front of the player, causing this distortion. It all just looked so beautiful from a visual presentation. I was completely taken in by that, and I feel that it was an enhancer, and I hope that when I play the game, that it's a gameplay enhancer and that none of that stuff gets distracting, because sometimes people can go a little bit crazy with the lens flares. Battlefield has been known for this, and hopefully they don't do that with all of the effects, but most of the stuff that I saw while watching that hour-long stream was just genuine, again, visual presentation enhancers, and that was a big positive right from the get-go for me. So let's talk about, some of the official reveal things, I guess mechanics that were officially clarified and revealed now to exist inside of Battlefield 1's multiplayer. The big thing, of course, is destruction. Surprise, surprise, it's made a return. Not all of the buildings are going to be destructible. There are certain buildings that won't be allowed to be destroyed completely. I've always been okay with this. I've talked about why this is a good thing in the past. I think a lot of people agree with me on this. There are certain buildings, key buildings, especially around capture points in game modes like Conquest and Rush, that need to have minimized destruction in order to maintain, the overall gameplay. They're also adding in ground deformation, at least on a much more substantial level. We got to see a lot of pretty large craters, large enough to hold a couple people in, to allow them to use it as makeshift cover while moving from one point to the other. And I really like the idea of this. In my head, I'm thinking of like artillery strikes being used to intentionally deform the ground in order to make, points in the map so players can push up. I don't know if that's going to be something that I can do, but if I can do that and coordinate that with my team, then hell yeah. But, again, the destruction looked awesome. It did. We get to see a lot of really amazing destruction, and we'll talk more about that when we get back to the airship thing. Now, this was the big thing that surprised me. This is not something I expected them to do in Battlefield at all, but I'm stoked about it, and that is what they're calling dynamic weather. Simply put, the idea that you can have a sunny day at the start of a match of Conquest, it can start to rain, the rain can combine with the heat and turn into fog, it'll go back to a bright day. Like, I think we only saw the weather change twice throughout the course of the stream. So at one point it was, normal day out, kind of overcast, it started raining. And then we did eventually see fog, I think, on the final match. They played 3 matches in total of Conquest, or 3 rounds, however you want to say it. And it all looked amazing. The rain, the particle, the water droplets actually forming on your weapon, on the submachine guns, on the rifles and such, on the tanks. The fog was nice and dense, but it didn't seem like it restricted gameplay, at least in a negative way. It definitely restricted view distance, so if you were playing like a sniper, you had to reconsider, what am I going to do now? How am I going to attack the enemy? And I like that. It's like a better version of the Levolution in a way. Like, I always felt like Levolution was just too much. It never really did what I thought it was going to do. I like the idea of this dynamic weather a little bit more. And I don't think we'll be seeing as much Levolution. They haven't talked about it, but it just doesn't make sense from most of the environments we'll probably be playing in inside of World War I. So I'll take the dynamic weather over Levolution any day. I hope it's as awesome to play in as it looked. So let's talk about the airships. Let's get to that point now. They're calling these Behemoths. So we have the Zeppelins, the airships, we have the war train, which we've seen in the gameplay trailer, and we have the battleship again, which we saw briefly in the teaser. These are all player controllable. At least that's what they're saying. Now, we didn't actually get to see first-person perspective of someone flying the airship, despite the fact that there were a total of 3 airships, 1 for each match. Now, the way these Behemoths work is that they show up for the losing team. Now, the airship specifically, the information we know about it is that it can hold 6 players. It has gondolas located on the bottom that allow players to man the guns that are on those gondolas and shoot down at the enemy. The airship is incredibly slow, though. So that's kind of its balancing act, is that it's controlled by a player, but the player can't just fly it all over the map and, sort of ravage everything. It's very slow. If you start moving towards C, you better not decide halfway there that you want to go all the way back to D, because chances are you're going to get gunned down and killed by then by enemy, air support, anti-air support, I should say, or actual enemy air support in the form of biplanes and triplanes and so on and so forth. So I like that. I like that it feels really deliberate, and I think that was kind of a general theme with Battlefield 1 in the gameplay that we saw, was really forcing the player to make a lot of deliberate decisions. Certain weapons, like the semi-automatic ones, take more time to reload now. You have to reload each bullet or use like a stripper clip. You've got your bolt-action rifles that, again, are going to have longer reload times. Getting into vehicles now has a full animation. You actually climb onto the vehicle, get in the hatch, so again, everything just felt more deliberate. I like the idea of that. Now, probably the most insane thing about the airship, and this blends into what I was talking about with destruction, is that when it finally comes crashing down in a giant ball of flame like the Hindenburg, and it hits the ground, it's part of the game. Like, you get one of those per match. They show up, as I said, for the losing team as sort of a balancing act. When it crashes finally and hits the ground, it leaves behind its metal carcass. That doesn't burn away, and then it stays there, and it's part of the environment now. It could potentially block off pathways for vehicles, it could restrict movement for players inside of certain buildings, and because it's player controlled, that can happen just about anywhere on the map. I have talked so many times in the past about Battlefield. What do I want from the next Battlefield? And I think the one thing that you guys who watch the channel often will remember hearing me say again and again, sort of like it's on loop, is give the control back to the players. Stop taking control away from us. Stop trying to force battlefield moments. Battlefield moments are something that happen naturally when players are given tools and then allowed to use those tools against one another or use them to interact with the game world. That's exactly what they're doing by letting us fly the airship. I love that. I love that so much. I want to see them push for more of that, because to me that is 100% purely fantastic. I love the way that all came together. It looked incredible on stream, and I hope it's just as amazing of a spectacle when I get to experience it for the very first time in game. Now, the airship, as I said, shows up for the losing team. That's the idea of Behemoths as a whole. So the question I have for you guys, while we're 10 minutes into this video at this point, is what do you think about that? It's definitely a big balancing act. You know, you want to make sure that you're giving that team the tools to potentially make a comeback, but at the same point, if the other team is just, you know, so well put together, you don't want it to feel like they've been cheated, you know, because the other team has gained access to this airship. And I have to say, we only saw 3 matches, so I'm only going on that. Who knows what it'll be like when we get in-game and the game has been played for a month. So obviously, DICE is going to have to pay very close attention to all of that to maintain its balance. But the team that was given the airship, you know, ended up losing anyways, because they just didn't really have the coordination, and the thing kept getting strafed by triplanes and biplanes, and like eventually it just came down in a ball of fire. Came down in a ball of fire time and time again. So while there's no doubt that it can be powerful, you know, it's going to be about how the player uses it. And I think giving the player control in some ways acts as like a balancing act against, you know, something like the AC-130, which just kind of like circles the whole map super fast and just can annihilate everything. The AC-130 was one of the most frustrating additions to Battlefield ever. I hate it. I hate it so much. It makes no sense to me. It just feels like absolute crap to get killed by that thing. Hopefully the airship is nothing like that. It didn't look like the AC-130, but we'll see when we actually play the game later this year, or actually the beta, which they did actually say, should get this out of the way, open beta this summer for Insider. So if you haven't already signed up for Battlefield Insider, do it. Do it now. This is your opportunity to get into that beta and actually play it this summer. So potentially within the next couple of months, which is, of course, wicked awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the smaller stuff. Let's talk about tanks. You know, I mentioned that they're doing full animations for vehicle entry, which I really like the idea of this. They talked a little bit about the roles of the different, you know, the like assault role, the medic role, and the driver role. So the driver is the guy who can get in and out of vehicles, you know, on a whim. He can get in and out of the tank, hop out of it. He can also self-repair the tank while it is stationary. So when self-repairing a tank, the driver, the player who's controlling that vehicle, doesn't have to get out of the vehicle, but they can't do anything with the vehicle. They can't fire their weapons. They can't rotate the turret. If it has a rotating turret, probably not, because these are World War I tanks, but you know where I'm going with this. And you can't move. I like the idea of that. I like the idea of like a self-repair, because the thing is, we have light, medium, and heavy tanks. You know, they're looking at all of the tanks that existed in prototype or, you know, straight up form in World War I. So you have like light tanks that are controlled by 1 person, medium tanks that are maybe controlled by like 3 players, and heavy tanks which could be controlled by, you know, maybe up to 6 players or something like that. So that self-repair mechanic makes sense to me. You know, the idea of not being able to repair a light tank or having to like get out and then do their, it just seems unnecessary. So I don't know. I thought that was a smart decision, you know, considering what they're doing with the vehicles this time around. Now, for any of you who, of course, have done any research about World War I or know anything about it, you know, World War I was essentially the birth of modern warfare. You know, like, people went crazy with prototype weapons and developed weapons that ended up being used on the battlefield and tested. And it seems like, you know, they're very much trying to use a lot of those weapons, or at least get them into the game, because we have a huge variety of stuff that we didn't even see all of today. From bolt-action rifles to semi-auto rifles like the Gerwer, we've got SMGs, you know, side-mounted magazines, top-mounted magazines, bolt-action rifles, sniper rifles with, you know, scopes, which all the weapon models, I have to say, looked incredible. Bayonets, of course, which there's a wonderful little bayonet mechanic. We actually got to see that in action twice during the stream. So you get the bayonet. When you're in a sprint, you can sort of activate the bayonet and then do a long charge where your guy's like, ah! I imagine people will hear you screaming, but the idea of someone turning around just as you get close enough to them to stab them in the chest with the bayonet seems incredibly satisfying. It looked really cool. I just like the idea of that. I can only imagine, you know, groups of squads like getting together and forming up to make massive bayonet charges all at once. So that's going to be fun. And, you know, again, the weapons, there's a huge variety. You know, it's to be expected. Like I said, shotguns, light machine guns, The recoil was the one thing that I was really paying attention to because I was hoping that a lot of the weapons would have a heftier recoil. It's completely different, you know, watching and playing the game. You can look at, you know, animation for recoil, and it doesn't really compare to actual compensating recoil when you play a game dealing with it in game. But everything seemed to have a slightly heftier recoil, and in fact, Westy commented on it at one point. One of the casters, you know, mentioned that the pistols have a little bit more kick. You know, even a lot of the semi-automatic rifles, you're not going to be really spam them. SMGs, you know, are really going to be like the only spray and pay weapon up close. And then, of course, you've got your your LMGs for, you know, extended sustained fire. But everything, like I said, you know, that theme of deliberateness, like everything feeling more deliberate. One of my biggest concerns, though, was when we saw the scoped rifles. Now, I didn't expect them to do pure bolt action rifles. I really didn't. You know, bolt action with iron sights. I expected there to be scoped variants of both the semi-automatic and the bolt action rifles, and it seems like that's going to be the case. But one of the things that I kept noticing, at least with all the scopes, is they don't have extreme zoom. So I don't think there's going to be any of that 5,000 yard shot, you know, 5,000 meter shot stuff from Battlefield 4. Obviously, we're much earlier on the technological timeline with scope technology, and they're preserving that concept. And I think that this is going to make this, you know, hopefully one of the best games when it comes to dealing with a recon class. Because I like the idea of the sniper role in Battlefield. I just hate when 7 members of my team are on some cliff somewhere because they want to get an 8,000 meter snipe. Hopefully what'll happen, and this seemed to be the case with a lot of the people that we saw sniping, is that you're in the fray a little bit more. It's about finding concealment, you know, almost at a close range, in a close range environment or a medium range environment, you know, adapting to your environment, moving from location to location to remain concealed from the enemy to avoid being killed rather than using distance to your advantage. So you're using proper concealment over the 6,000 meter shot, you know, in a tiny rock on the side of a cliff somewhere that you can just kind of peek behind every time somebody starts shooting at you. I'll be happy to see that go away and see, again, a more balanced recon role that requires a lot more awareness from the sniper themselves in order to survive and to effectively support their team. It looked exciting. You know, the idea of sniping from that sort of classic windmill location on a sort of countryside map looked incredibly satisfying, and I'm really hoping that that role finally finds a perfect place among all of the other roles inside of a Battlefield game. For once, there will always be people that complain, there's no doubt about that, but as long as I don't have 7 people on a rooftop in the middle of nowhere not supporting my team, I'll be very, very happy. So there's not too much else to say. We can sit here, you know, and kind of comment all day long on what we saw, but that is just that. This is exactly things that I saw during the stream. It was awesome to actually see the game be played. I'm happy they did things this way. While the stream itself wasn't flawless, you know, they showcased the new free cam with the spectator cam. I wish that the casters would have been able to actually control that stuff because, as I said, I wanted to see more of the in-cockpit view of the planes and of the tanks, and we didn't get to see a lot of that. They kept jumping back to the free cam, which looks cool. Thank you. You're showing off, you know, the beautiful environmental and map design that the team at DICE has done. I respect that, I do, but this is my first time seeing the game. We want to see first-person gameplay, and I think a lot of people felt that way. However, the beta is hopefully just a few months away, hopefully sooner than later. I mean, the release isn't that far off. You know, we're talking October, right? So, you know, I think the sooner they get the beta out, the sooner they can start to look at the feedback and deal with server issues and connection problems and all of that wonderful stuff to make sure that the game is good to go on day one, which of course is the biggest concern that I think all of us have. At this point, I think Battlefield 1 is going to be pretty damn fun. I think there's no denying that the new setting has refreshed the experience. We're dealing with a lot of awesome weaponry and prototypes. You know, we've got tanks and biplanes. I like what they're doing with the Zeppelins. I'm excited to see the other Behemoths. Dynamic weather is absolutely sick, and I can't wait to play in the fog. It's all up to DICE now to launch the game successfully, maintain the support to make sure that the game runs well at launch and isn't strucken down with tons of bugs and connection issues, much like Battlefield 4 was. And fingers crossed, all will go really well for them. I wish them the best of luck, as I always do with all the developers out there. Let me know everything that you guys have to say about that stream if you watched it. If you glossed over it, you know, was there anything that stood out to you in terms of watching other people play the game? Anything you're excited for? Anything you're concerned about? Get the discussion flowing down in the comment section below. Make sure you sign up for Battlefield Insider. I'll have it in the description if you want to try and get into that beta this summer. Thank you so much for watching. Look forward to more E3 coverage from me this week, and I will see you in the next one.